So I know everybody's here to hear a talk about writing less framework-specific code. I came up with that talk, and it was going to be about a 20-minute talk. So I said, we've got 45 minutes, so I rolled it in. We're going to cover that as part of this. So it's part of a bigger talk, which is some tips. I've been doing development professionally for over 20 years. I know, I feel really old saying that. But I've come up with some tips and ideas of things that I've developed as part of my dev process that I think are helpful for most developers. So take them if you like them, leave them if you don't. So what this talk is not about. I'm not up here to talk about how to program, which is good. We all know how to do that, or at least most of us. Sometimes we don't, sometimes we do. But that's not what I'm here to do, is teach you how to program. But more so to talk about the idea of your workflow, how you work, things that'll make you more proficient, and not just proficient today, but proficient in the future with your code bases. So not just that, of when you learn to program, you are an individual. You're learning how to program, you're learning logic and everything else. So what these tips will help you to do is to work as a team. And even if you work individually on a project by yourself, you still have a team, because you from yesterday is a different person. You from a year ago, you from 5 years ago, 20 years ago, is a different developer. So as you get into your code, you still have to think about what those people are thinking when they go into your code base in the future, if that makes sense. I also forgot it at the beginning. If you have questions or if you want clarification on anything, feel free to interrupt. I don't care. We're all good. Raise your hand, yell it out, whatever. We're all set. So this is what the talk initially was. Stop writing framework-specific code. But what does that actually mean? Because as an Angular developer, myself, I still love Angular. I have worked on the Angular team for a while. I worked on the Angular CLI. I'm an Angular GDE, but the topic and the title there is a little bit of a misnomer. In fact, Emma, who works on the GDE team, or excuse me, the Angular team at Google, who runs the GDE program there, questioned me like, your talk, what's that kind of about? I still love Angular. I have no problems with the framework, but this applies not only just to Angular, but also any other web framework that you're currently using. So in order to talk about this, I want to talk a little bit about history. Back in 2001, yeah, again, 20 plus years of doing this, I had a conversation at work about whether or not we were going to support Netscape Navigator or IE or both. Right? And people are like, Netscape Navigator? I've never even heard of that. Yeah, chuckles from people who have. And the conversation was based off of when we were writing our front-end validation work, because that's all that we really did in JavaScript in the front end at the time, what language were we writing that in? We were writing classic ASP on the back end, so we were doing VB script. IE ran VB script fine in the browser, which is cool, because then the whole idea with Node and front-end frameworks now, hey, you get to write the same code in different places. You get to share different pieces of code, different validation, and there was a lot of advantages to that. However, IE also supports JavaScript, and that becomes important later on, although we're definitely not talking about that old code, because I don't even want to think about what I wrote back then. Again, old me writes bad code. Yeah. So that's where this conversation began. But now, as we go from 2001 all the way up to today, a lot of things have changed in the web, sort of. Back in 2001 or so, in the early 2000s, there were some major frameworks that were being used. jQuery was a huge one, and I'm sure that some people may not recognize the other two names up there. MooTools was very similar, and Handlebars was more of a templating type library to be able to dynamically render some templates on the front end. So that was the ecosystem of what ran in the browser. A lot of jQuery, and what it provided is the ability to standardize your API, because IE and Firefox and Netscape all had different implementations of JavaScript. It wasn't standardized. jQuery kind of leveled the playing field and said, hey, if you go through me, I'll take care of all those differences for you, which is extremely powerful. If somebody who's trying to support more than one browser that don't exactly handle runtime and accessing values the same way, excuse me, provided a whole lot of power back then. Then things started to evolve. We get some more powerful frameworks to be able to do some more dynamic rendering on the front end without necessarily having to interact with the DOM, do some abstractions away from necessarily dealing with DOM, got us to the point where we could actually test our code that was running in an easier way, especially with the evolution of Node, especially with AngularJS's providing of dependency injection, something familiar, as this is, I'd say, pretty balanced between .NET developers and web developers. Let's do a show of hands. .NET developers, raise your hand. Cool. Web developers? JavaScript developers? Both. Who writes both? Decent amount. Cool. So that type of consistency for people who are writing .NET code on the back end, used to dependency injection, IOC. God, I still remember IOC. It's been 7 years since I've written .NET. But the similarities there. Okay, somebody's speaking to us. Okay. I didn't just hear that. Somebody else heard that too? All right, cool. So the ecosystem was changing, and we saw a lot of different changes in the browser. And now today, when we look at the ecosystem of things like Ember and React and Quick and Vue and Angular and, did I miss any? I got them all. Okay. With those, a lot of things have become more modular, component-based, and the different advancements with web standards. However, there's really one consistency across all of these. That's JavaScript. Or personally, as I think about it, TypeScript. And that balance of what's been consistent through the browser or through the technologies across 20 plus years is the same programming language. So when I say the idea of writing less framework specific code, it's the idea of trying to write stuff that will live with your applications over time. Because these technologies change. We have what, 9, 11, math? 11 different frameworks up there in 20 years. There's a lot more that aren't mentioned, but those are the predominant ones. So things change over time, and how do you write code that's going to persist and last and be usable over time? Because a lot of times your business logic doesn't change a whole lot, and you need that logic. And as you migrate with technology, as things advance, you want your code to be portable with you. So why do I care about this? I work at HeroDevs, as was stated in the intro. Thank you again. I'm from the city of champions, but I'm not a Pittsburgh sports fan. But that's okay. I work at HeroDevs. And what HeroDevs does is we do a lot of Angular consulting. And as part of that, we partner with XLTS. AngularJS is no longer supported by Google. XLTS is providing long-term support for AngularJS. So if you have a production application running AngularJS, this isn't a sales thing, by the way, I'm just getting this background. So if you have an AngularJS application that's still running in production and you need support, security fixes mainly, and that going forward, because that's part of your company's requirement to have supported software, we provide that support at a cost. So as part of doing that, a lot of our clients that are saying, hey, can you support us with our old application? Sure, we can do that for you. However, a lot of them are interested in migrating away from AngularJS. Most of them are going to Angular, but we also have quite a few of our clients who are going to React. And the reason why this is really important to me working there and to our teams is because as we're doing these migrations, we are seeing so much code that gets thrown away that has to be changed, that has to be tweaked, that has to be moved over and extracted out of the old framework so it can be plugged into the new one. But there has to be a way that we can write our code in the same language. We're still writing JavaScript or TypeScript, and TypeScript is just the superset of JavaScript. If you'd like to talk about that more, hit me up afterwards and I'll be happy to talk about that. So with the idea of having portable code, if it's written in the same language, why aren't we writing it in a way that we can reuse that later on? That's the big question. So what does that look like? We'll leave that up there because he's funny. So here's an example of an Angular component. And as you can see, it's a bad example, as the name of the class. But what we're going to focus on is the idea of this get business data function and how we can take that a little bit easier. I don't know why the click handler is there. Because it's not doing anything. I don't know, sample code. So we're going to concentrate on this particular function. And there's a lot of things happening here. And this is mostly just an example code, just a proxy to be able to sit there and say, hey, this is some logic that I might have written in my application. So whenever we're getting the business data, we are making a server call to be able to get HTTP data back out. And then when that data comes back, it's in a particular shape from the server that we don't really care about for the front end. So we're getting back an object that has first name and last name, but when we're presenting that, we're just going to present it as name. Again, just a very basic example of some sort of logic that we have within there. So how can we take something like this and make it portable? So we're going to take that through a few steps of what that looks like. So we're going to refactor it a little bit. And what we're going to do is take the idea of mapping the business logic out of our the actual root of the function as a fat arrow function to a separate function, which is great because what that's doing is it's providing our code up top to be more portable. And then that will allow us to refactor that, or that refactors that out a little bit more. And we can take it a little bit further because then we could take the idea of the logic that's mapping through the function, or excuse me, over the array in there and pull that out into its own function as well. Which seems, in this example, seems a little bit odd. However, bigger examples, you have more business logic, larger functions, but this illustrates the point of what we're trying to accomplish. And this is great because it makes our code a little bit more portable. But this is still living inside of an Angular component. And we don't necessarily want that when we want to be able to have portable things moving forward, where you potentially may move away from Angular in the future to something else. So what we can do is we can take that logic and say, hey, it's part of my component, which is tied to my framework, and I don't really want that there. Angular has the concept of a service. And a service is a place where you can just put logic. It's just a TypeScript class, which by itself is really, really portable. Everybody creates classes, even .NET if you're not doing JavaScript. The idea of a class is extremely testable. You don't have to worry about how does it get created or anything else. There's dependency injection if you need it, but it spins up a new class and it exposes functions and properties that you can easily test in isolation. But we can actually make this a little bit better. There's nothing in here that references the this keyword. So there's nothing that's accessing anything inside. Wait, is there one? No. Although it should. That's a bug. This one actually should be calling this to reference the other function. But bad code. You understand. Anyway, the idea that this can be a little bit better because they need to know about each other's functions, but there's no state in here. There's no properties that are being accessed, anything else. These functions are both pure functions, and that whatever you take in, you will always get the same result. There's no additional side effects. It's not listening to anything else. All of the results are based off of the parameters that are being passed in. So you can get consistent results based off of consistent parameters. By making it a little bit more portable, we can take it outside of the idea of a class and just have them be exported functions. And by doing that, functions are supported everywhere in JavaScript. You can just import in a function into another TypeScript module or JavaScript module to be able to utilize that function. By applying practices like this inside of your front-end code, you make your code future-proof. Because this code, for the most part, there's been advancements in the language across time. Like the string interpolation there on line 3, pretend there's line numbers. That code would have run, aside from that minor point, in 2001. So that's code that could have lasted approximately 20 years plus going into the future. So by writing code that is just using the framework of the language, allows you to have portable code that you can write your logic that will live on beyond your framework. I'd love to think that Angular is going to be here forever because that's what I've been doing for the last 7 years, and it's paid my bills and puts food on my kids' table. My table too. But it may go away, and that's fine because this is a practice that I need to get better with, and it's something that as developers we're always striving to improve. So by taking your code and your logic and detaching it as much as you can from the framework, because all the frameworks do, and this is a frustrating fact, as web developers, we're just building strings. You're just concatenating different values together in between there. So, but by pulling logic out, you can use the string concatenating of those different libraries that they're providing throughout time. So, the goals of doing this, maintainability. By having simpler functions, it makes it more testable. It makes it more portable to use across different frameworks. Plus, you can reuse it in additional places within your application. If you write consistent code and logic that could be used in multiple components or whatever, you can pull those functions in wherever you need them. The portability, and I like to refer to these, I actually have given an entire talk about ilities, the idea of all of these things just improves your code base as well. So today, going into the future, you can have all these frameworks supported. The code that was written there could be used by any of these frameworks. Any questions on that? I know that there may be some questions. I wanted to give people a chance to ask questions if you may have them. No? Cool. I've got other things. I've got more tips because, again, the whole idea of having 45 minutes, we're talking maybe about 20 minutes or so of that. So, more tips to make you a more proficient developer. So, we talked about the ilities and how you can, what can you do to achieve these ilities more within your applications and your code bases. So, my least favorite developer in the world is me in the past because I wrote bad code. And I have to go back and I have to read my code that I wrote a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, 5 years, 20 years ago. And it's not good. So how do I get to the point that I'm writing code that I can go back and I can easily decipher what I was intending? Not to mention what all of my team members were writing and what they were thinking within there. So how can you write better code and be more proficient as a developer? So something to consider, and this is the least complicated example that I can come up with to consider when you're writing your code, to go back at. The ternary operator. It's a simple example, and a lot of people can easily look at that and decipher what it means. For the longest time, I could never remember which was true and which was false, and it compounded like my time as I go back and read code. All right, I'm reading through this, and I come up to the ternary operator. All right, which is the true, which is the false? And it took me time. It took my brain time to digest that information. So why not just write an if statement? My brain has been reading if statements for more than 25 years or so, probably closer to 30, which is sad. But my brain reads those so much faster, and I'm sure that everybody else's does too. And people write code using things like the ternary operator or other logic that may be more efficient and may run a little bit faster, but if you're saving a millisecond upfront for your users, is that really worth the investment of time that people will have to put into reading your code later on? I say no. I am a big fan of the idea of writing readable code, maintainable code in that sense. Maintainability, this ility, is huge. To be able to write readable code is far beyond the benefits that you'll get from performance. I get it. There's some applications where you actually need to tweak every last bit of performance out of an application. But to me, not at the cost of not being able to easily maintain. Again, simple example, but people try and do these cute little things in their code bases all the time. Oh, I'll just comment it. Commenting code doesn't work because people don't maintain them. Comments go stale. Code does not. Readable code is light years better than documented code. Async is hard. Asynchronous code is not easy, okay? So the other example that I have is when you are writing your code, you do some asynchronous things. You may go and get some data, and when that comes back, you need to tell your global state that that data is coming back. You're composing asynchronous things together. Again, as I'm reading through this, I need to say, all right, something happened in the UI, and I need to go get data. And then when that's done, I need to do this. But I'm doing some mapping operation. Okay, and then when that's done, I need to come back and do that. The idea of separating those things out, of taking the idea of what you're trying to orchestrate asynchronously and detaching that from the actual business logic that's happening by writing well-named, extracted, refactored functions and using named functions versus inline functions is huge. I can read that. I understand what's happening. Then I'm going to get data. And then when that's done, I'm going to map some data. And when I'm done mapping it, I'm going to update my store. Compare the two. The readability of trying to refactor your code to be more digestible is huge. And then if I need to know, hey, how am I mapping the data? Well, I've got that function. I can go look at it. I'm updating the store. How's that happening? I can go look at that later. But to orchestrate what you're doing asynchronously, detached from the actual business logic, is another tip to help make your code be more readable and maintainable. Because maybe the mapping changes and then you have to try and find that code. It's a lot easier to find a named function than it is to find an inline function. Biggest violation of this, of writing code like this, is me. I do that all the time. So these are practices that I try to stick to. I'm still trying to get better. 20 plus years of doing this, I still write bad code. The goal is to strive to get better. So by doing this, we're increasing the readability. We're increasing the maintainability. And we are also increasing the readability. Was it usability? Reusability, maintainability. Where's the readability? That's the one. Thank you. Reading is hard, right? Yeah. Even when the words are plain in front or behind my face, not always easy. So, the other thing to consider, development is not a solo sport. Sure, you're sitting at the keyboard by yourself and doing that, but find yourself a support system. Find yourself a buddy, a friend, online, somebody to go through and share this experience with, learn from. Learning is great when you talk to other people, and you can learn from others. Listening to a talk like this, I'm dispersing information. I found that my knowledge of development increased exponentially when I started giving talks. And I'm not saying you have to go out to conferences and put in talks that you want to do there, or at a local meetup, or a lunch and learn in your company, or the person sitting next to you to teach them. Find a way to be able to express information to others. And whether or not and it's usually a back and forth, especially with coworkers, to be able to sit there and say, hey, I learned this, it's pretty cool, let me show you. And vice versa, for them to be able to show you. Don't go it alone because it's a hard road. And if you can have a buddy along there with you, buddy system works. Learn with someone else. The other one, mastering your tools. And I've done, and with that, with working with a buddy, you do a lot of pair programming. Who here is pair programmed? Or who here has done a debugging session with anybody else to be able to decipher what's going on? As you're sitting there, right? How many of you have sat there and watched somebody fumble through their tools of not knowing where something is in their IDE, or not being able to find something within their terminal, or what command to run, and go look up other things? Become more proficient in your tools. We're going to talk about a few things within there. Proficiency is the goal, that you can use your tools effectively to get your job done. I am not here to sell you on any particular tool. I don't care what you use. I'm going to show some examples of the tools that I use and talk about the proficiencies that I have within there, and hopefully some tips you can take away and help grow your knowledge base. So whether or not you're in version control, I don't care what you're using. If you're using Git, Team Foundation version control, that did say TFS, and I remember that they redid it to Team Foundation version control. SVN, whichever one you're using, get more efficient with it. Learn to be able to get the code you need and to be able to push the code you need effectively. In your editor, use whatever you need. I didn't include Visual Studio because it was really long, but VS Code, WebStorm, Vim, Visual Studio, whatever it is, know your tools, know where where you have to go to be able to debug, to refactor, to rename. Keyboard shortcuts are huge. And also your debugger. How do you decipher what's wrong with your program? To get that iteration loop as quick as possible of, hey, I wrote bad code that just doesn't work. How do I discover what I did wrong, and how do I get that code corrected? So I'm going to go through some of the tools that I have set up and take a look and walk through. Anybody have any questions at this time? No? Okay. Everybody see just fine? I think I went through that. So this is my git config file. I guess I can stand up. I don't need to go through this. I have a bunch of aliases set up. Sure, I could type git checkout, but you know what? It takes a long time to type. CO is a lot faster. I can create new branches and cherry pick. I don't use that one very often, but I can never remember. Is it cherry pick without a dash, with a dash? I don't need to worry about it. CP? And these are things that have become muscle memory for me as I go through and my dev workflow. Get better at your tools. Be able to use them quickly and get in and out and do the things you need. Git amend. I never remember commit, amend, no edit. I created that alias years ago, and I use it every day. Git remotes, -v, the branch rename. This thing has saved me so much time because I've almost bookmarked the Stack Overflow answer to be able to find how do I rename a branch in Git. You know what? I type git rename, git rename, and I'm done. You can set up aliases specifically for Git in a global config file. Love this. So it's Git and then all of these. Rebasing, real easy. Any questions there? Or screenshots, whatever. I think I share my .files on GitHub. I might. It might be a private repo. I don't know. Maybe I'll make them public. That's one example. Another example is my shell. I have a whole lot of more aliases within there. GG, I type that probably 100 times a day. What do I have currently checked out within my branch? I can show you right now. This is the repo of where I created my code examples for the talk. I get my quick list of what's in there by typing 2 characters. I can type it with any finger on my hand. But it's so quick, so fast to be able to create those. GG may not work for you. You may create something that makes for you. GS, maybe that works for you, or better for you, or Git S. So put it as a Git alias within there. Whatever it takes to make you more proficient. Even if you're using a GUI, learn where all your settings are. Learn how to quickly do a rebase within there. Learn how to resolve your conflicts quicker. Anything you can do to make your workflow more proficient. You don't want to be the person on that call with a friend fumbling through as they're trying to get the work done too, as you're trying to fumble through your tools. What else do I have in here that's interesting? npm reinstall. How many people have ever had to reinstall their node modules? npm reinstall, because when I come in here and I type npm r, I hit tab and it auto completes. Huge, big time saver. Do git whip is this function inside of here that I wrote a long time ago, and it's 2 versions of the same commit, whether or not I pass in a message. And it's referenced down here as git whip that calls this internal function. What that allows me to do is say, hey, I'm working on something. I basically need to stash it away and work on something different, check out a different branch, but I have current changes. So if I come in here, I have a whole bunch of changes, as we can see. And again, this is just an alias for git status, showing that, but showing it shorter, which is git, I believe git status -s. Yeah, but again, GG for me. If I want to commit all the changes, is this size good, by the way, on the terminal? I'll bump it up a little bit. If I type in git whip and I type a message, hello DevReach. What that does is it goes through and it adds everything and basically says, hey, stage all of my files for me, and then create a commit for me. You can see the commit up there. So if I look at my git log, and this is probably going to be a new alias that I create, because I can do, actually I don't have to do n, I can do --1 line. You can see it creates that as a commit message, but it puts those emojis there, which is kind of cute and everything else. However, what it tells me is when I go and look at my branch, when I push that I know, hey, that was a temporary commit that I created, so go ahead and rename that one so it's a little bit cleaner of a Git history later on. Did I have anything else in here that was interesting? Global list, I never remember that one, to go and look that up. The other one is I created an alias down here to be able to sync my repo. You have a public or an upstream branch that you're working off of. This is huge when you're doing open source on GitHub. So you have an upstream, and then you fork that. So you have an origin, which is under your name. What this does is it keeps my main, oh, it's down here at the bottom. Let me scroll so you can see it a little bit better. What it does is it will go ahead and get everything from upstream. It'll check out my main branch. It'll merge the upstream main in. And apparently I still need to scroll to be able to see the rest of this. And then it's going to push up to my origin main. So what that does effectively is we'll take the main that's in upstream that everybody else is committing to and creating pull requests against, and make that synchronized with my local main branch as well as my origin main branch. So everything's in sync. I don't have to worry about it. The only rule I keep in my head is don't work off of main directly. Always create a new branch. And then that allows me to do local rebases easier to be able to have my code ready to push, ready to create branches. And then on this machine, I use VS Code Insider, so I just type code instead of VS Code. Just a few examples of aliases that you can create to make yourself more proficient as a user of your tools. What else? So that's good in terms of setting up that environment. When you're using your editor, use different tools that you can within here. The one thing that I use all the time when I'm writing or working within VS Code is I use multi-cursors. Has anybody used multi-cursors before? Absolute time saver as you're doing that. Create multiple cursors. So I can come down and I can create multiple cursors by holding Command Option down arrow. And I can have multiple cursors to be able to type different things. And I can do that. I could also select something, which is going to go find all instances of tap or the next instance of tap to be able to find those and rename those easily. Multi-cursors is a huge time saver, and everybody's like, wow, how'd you do that so quickly? Working with JSON a lot, you end up having to format a whole lot of data. And by being able to find your way through that process quickly, what do I have? Users.json. To be able to select and easily find different places that I can come and find, hey, look, now I have all my keys easily selectable from that given object within there in, what, 2 seconds? To be able to proficiently use my tools to be able to select and find the information that I need and edit what I need. Debugging is another big one. With, Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere along version 14, this file for VS Code started getting produced by the Angular CLI when you generate a new project. It configures VS Code to be able to launch directly your debugger attached to the browser without having to do anything. I think there was one little tweak. It didn't use Chrome, it used something other than Chrome, and I just changed what type it was. So I can come in here without changing anything, and it's going to run through all of that build process and automatically attach my debugger to the application. So if I come in here, and if I were to put a breakpoint, as we get to watch my machine that is from 2016 build an Angular application. And it should launch my browser. Yep, I see it launching. And I can't click on it because I'm not good with my mouse. Open my DevTools, and when I go to that branch and I click on that, I'm now in a fantastic debug experience that I can see my code, what's happening, how can I fix what's wrong with my code. There's nothing wrong with my code in this example. But it's just an example of how you can get quickly to set up. You know your tools, know how to use your editor as best you can. .NET people, you have it easy. Visual Studio does a lot of that for you. I'm jealous I missed that. Having this takes me back to those days. So I miss that. So I typically, as an old school developer, when I'm doing web development, I typically don't go through this workflow of launching that, especially because the application I work on day to day right now is based off of Angular version 11, so it's getting a little long in the tooth. But I don't have this experience set up in VS Code. However, what I do is I end up using the terminal to be able to launch my process manually. So I'm going to run that same command, but just detached. Kill that. But again, learning your tools. So I'm going to go over some browser debugging tools that I find absolutely time-saving that hopefully will help you out with your workflow. I think I have everything commented out, so we can go through one by one at the different examples. Okay. Save that. Oh, need to launch Chrome. Wow, I've got a lot of things open. Those are my notes for the talk. Don't look at this. All right, so I go to localhost. Are we not running it? Oh, that port's in use. No. That's because the other process hadn't stopped. Get that up and running. How many people have written console? Oh, hi back there. Are you taking a picture?
No, we're on stream.
Oh, we're on stream? Oh, hi, stream. Okay. So everybody's who's done web development, I'm sure, has written console log, whether or not you're in Node or anything else. Am I good on time, by the way? Dan? 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Okay. I can wrap it up in 10. All right. But I want to show this quickly. So you've written console.log. Let's look at that code real quick. And you just have an object that's being pulled in. It was that user's JSON file. I'm just pulling that in, and I am looking at it. I'm just spitting it out. This is not decipherable. That ruins my flow as I'm looking at this data to say, oh, hey, there's 10 things, that's great, I know that there's 10, but what's in that data? How can I easily understand what's in there? Console.log sucks. The debugging experience is much better. If you can use that experience. However, there's different things that are available within console.log to make your life a little bit better. So save this, it'll rerun in the browser as we go over it. So I'm just looping over each of the users, and I'm doing console.group. And what that's doing is it's creating a group with this key, which I'm using the user.name as the key within there, doing some logs inside of there. I'm logging out what the ID and the email is, and then I'm saying, hey, I'm done with that group. So when we look at that, this is a lot cleaner that I could say, hey, each one of these users look like this. And that's a little bit cleaner to look at. But we can, where's my editor? There we go. One step better is we can actually use, to me, what I find a little bit more useful is the idea of creating a collapse group. So this way, whenever I initially look at that and I rerun this, it's going to refresh real quick, I can see just, hey, quickly browse over and say, hey, these are your usernames. I'm looking at this one. Is this one rendering correctly? It's Patricia. I can easily find Patricia and do that and look at the individual data within there rather than having to write an if statement without around a log statement. So to write essentially a conditional log statement. And then the last one is the one that I hope you take with you as you're doing this, because we do a lot of debugging of arrays when you're doing web development. Console.table. Who here has ever used console.table? Yeah, I figured you did. Console.table takes all that entire array and spits it out in a table view. If you take nothing away from this talk, take this with you. Use console.table to be able to look at groups of data within your console. And I believe it has really good browser support, especially with Edge to be Chromium based. So definitely go and take a look at that. I think that was all I had within here. Yeah, use console.table. All right, back to slides. See what else I had. So in summary, and I think I'm good with time, which is good. Ilities, maintainability, readability, testability, and reusability. I may have said that twice. Readability and reusability are 2 R's. Write code that you can keep with you. Don't necessarily fully buy into a tool that you're using because the web tools will change over time. But the one constant is JavaScript. Write good JavaScript. TypeScript's okay because it compiles to JavaScript and it just provides a richer developer experience as you're writing your code. But if for whatever reason TypeScript goes away, you can say, hey, TypeScript, render out all my code to JavaScript, and then you have all of your JavaScript, and you're not losing anything. So you have basically an escape hatch to be able to get back to just JavaScript. Solo, don't do it by yourself. Find a support system, learn from others, teach others, because teaching will take you from where you are and escalate because it forces you to understand the underlying things that are happening within your code base or within the tools that you're using. Again, learn your tools, become proficient. Don't let your tools be a hindrance. Allow them to be your superpower to get the code written that you need to write, to be able to debug, to be able to decipher what's going on. When you need to push code, be able to do that quickly and efficiently. Write, refactor, repeat. If you need to write all of your code in a single component as you're writing your application, fine. Get something out the door, ship it, great. Test through, experiment. But when it's time to actually finalize that code, pull it out. I can't tell you how many times I've written everything just in a template, and then I take that code and I pull it out into the code behind, and then I take it from there and I move it to a service, and then I take the service and I refactor that into functions like the process I walked through earlier. That's my workflow, is that I will do a lot of things bad up front, but then I take the time to clean it up before I actually push it. And then be kind to future you. By writing good code, you're helping yourself in the future. And that's all. So thank you so much for coming and listening to me talk. And I'm around if you want to ask questions now. Dan, do I have like 5 minutes or something before the next? Okay. So if you have questions now, I'm happy to hang out and answer questions. If you want to find me afterwards, that's fine too. Cool.
Actually,
Yeah.
I just want to add to everybody You don't have to create your own aliases for GitHub, for Git commit, Git checkout run. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I may have that set up as part of my prompt.
It's internally made by their default Git.
Yeah, I think there's Git, if I go. Yeah, there's plugins for Git, and it adds in some autocomplete things that are niceties. However, over time, before I started on Bash, so I wasn't even using my ZSH. But those aliases have come with me over time. So that when I was using Bash, I used all these aliases that I just brought over with me because that's how I work proficiently. But to your point, you may not necessarily need those. But if you find something that works for you that you want to create that will save you time, create your own. They're your tools. Configure them to how you want. But good point. Thank you. Anybody else?